All right, we are live. Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. I'm going to take this off for now, but I'm going to bring it back to my ears when my guest comes on, who will be Edward, also known as Eddie Spencer, because that's how he's showing up in the chat today. Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. It is 4:22. We got a great show, a really great show planned for you today. We're kind of going down the X-Files path here. We're going to be talking the hydrocephalic beings, also known as the Coneheads, with Edward Spencer, Mr. Edward Spencer, in the first hour. And we'll go a few other places as well, but we're going to start there. That'll be our point of departure. And then in hour number two, really psyched to have one of the, I'd say probably one of the top three Tartarian researchers on the internet, maybe in the world. And most of her work takes place on YouTube. I think she has a Tumblr page, I think. Whatever the one where they have the pictures. Anyway, I think it's Tumblr. Anyway, no, Pinterest. It's a Pinterest page. She does a Pinterest page with a number of photos that are Tartarian based. It's Michelle Gibson. And a number of you have asked for Michelle to be on the show, and ask and ye shall receive most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. If I can make it happen and I'm into it, it'll happen. Okay, before we bring the esteemed Edward Spencer on, I do want to share with you that this show is being brought to you today by my sponsor. Yes, I have a sponsor. Believe it or not. And he was on my show yesterday and did a great 30-minute appearance. And we talked about his product, which is CBD, and the sponsor is True Hemp Science. Let me just give you the link here. You can go to my website, which is 15 Minutes of Flame, right there, right? And pinned at the top of my homepage is a picture here, an illustration for True Hemp Science. And Chris is based out of Austin. It's Christopher Lynch. He's based out of Austin. And there's a link right there. If you want to partake of True Hemp Science's products, they've got products for humans, products for pets. They've got the killer app for sleep, which is his CBD gummies. I highly recommend them. If you have a hard time sleeping, that's an investment right there. You go through this link, which is the link for my website, and the code is 15 mins. That's 15, the number, and then capital M, lowercase. I guess it's all uppercase, right? MINS, 15 minutes. That'll get you $20 worth of product that Chris will put in your bundle if you spend more than 100. And it's easy to spend more than 100. So I think he's sending out batch number 33. His CBD has numbers. So you remember the number, and it's specifically geared towards a very specific type of usage. And I'm a fan, and I am somebody who actually partakes of his product. So there you go. We are sponsored by True Hemp Science. You can go right there on 15minutesofflame.com. This is right at the top of the page. Click through that link and see what he has to offer. Okay. Let's bring Edward in. He's been waiting. He's been in the chat for a while. By the way, thank you, Tartaria. I know I don't spend a lot of time with you, or Chattaria. I don't spend a lot of time with you on Friday because we just get right into it with our guests. But I just want to acknowledge you, welcome you. Glad you're here, and thank you for your support. We live in very interesting times, and hopefully we're here to be able to provide you with very interesting information, perspectives, and outlooks to get you through the times that we're in, so that we can move forward to what I've always thought and this is truth, and I've never said this before, but as a young man or a child, right, I always felt that there would be a golden age on this planet. And I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. I just knew it, right? Like we would have a golden age. And I felt, and this is not bullshit, but I felt like somehow I had a role to play and at a fairly early age. And so hang in there, right? Let's continue to feed our bodies and our minds and our spirits. Use a lot of discernment for the garbage information that's out there. And try to distill and just get, the highest vibration and, climb the branches and get the sweetest fruit. All right, let's bring Mr. Spencer on here. We've communicated by phone, a little bit by email. My first time actually seeing him visually, and I believe he just got out of surgery a couple of weeks ago. All right, without any further delay, here we go. Let's bring him in. Okay, there you are. Your mic is not activated. I'm going to ask you to unmute there.
Okay.
All right.
Very good.
What's going on, Mr. Spencer?
Well, can you elaborate on that question?
Just with you in general, like how are you doing? How are you feeling? I know that you have recently come out of surgery for a heart condition. So let's start there. How are you doing?
Okay, well, I'm doing weirdly. I have what's known as dysgeusia, or a form of that. And with that terms, that nothing tastes good to me. I have no appetite. Nausea is always close by. And I don't want to put anything in my mouth. That includes water.
Wow.
So I used to live to eat. I have to face that now. That was what I was all about. And now I've got to work at it. It's my major job is to take in sustenance.
So
but I'm
go ahead.
going along.
So when did this happen? How long have you had this condition?
3 weeks.
Still fairly new. So in COVID world, right, people talk about having the loss of taste and smell. Do you have the loss of taste and smell too?
No, I think I have what would be an increased sensitivity of taste, maybe and smell, hyperosmia, instead of anosmia, which seems to be talked up a lot about COVID. And I don't know the mechanism, of course. This is something I'm looking into.
How do you think, and we're going to get to the big picture topic, but I'm interested in this. How do you think you came down with this condition?
Well, it started in a rehabilitation program or facility, and I won't name it even though, well, okay, Smith Ranch Road, I'll name it, that I went to after my aortic valve replacement and then a pacemaker implant. And that was, I guess, in the end of February, and I was there all March. And the food was, it was horrible, let's put it that way, horrible and beyond.
Right.
And it sort of came on at some time during that.
Wow. I mean, I'm not sure what's worse, having an overreaction to taste and smell or not at all. They both seem to be fairly extreme.
Yes.
But I'm not sure I'd want to have to pick a poison there.
You know, we always just take that for granted. Ooh, lunch is coming. Ooh, what's for lunch?
Right, exactly. Yeah. You know, there's this fruit that supposedly if you eat it, it makes everything sweet. Have you heard about this fruit?
I have not.
Yeah, so it was kind of a big deal maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and there were a few internet videos, and they would have somebody eat this fruit and eat a lemon, and the lemon would be sweet, right? I'm wondering if maybe that fruit might be an interesting thing for you to explore. I don't know the name of it. It would probably take less than 5 minutes to find it on the internet if you wanted to do a search, but who knows?
Sweet is amplified in my taste situation.
So maybe by taking this fruit, it would be like a homeopathic, and it would take the sweet away because that's what it normally does. It makes other things sweeter.
You mean it would reverse?
That's right.
Sense what it does. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean,
So I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, why not? Right? It's not going to kill you.
Right. Well,
we hope not. I'm not a doctor. That's the preamble. So anyway, thank you for being here, and I hope that you sort out your olfactory. I guess, what do you call it? The olfactory is a smell. Whatever the tasting version of olfactory. I hope you sort it out, because that's a real bummer. And especially for somebody who likes to eat and enjoy food, boy, that'd be a tough thing to swallow, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it exactly. You got it. Tough thing to swallow.
All right, let's get into the topic of the day here. Now, you and I started to. You called me actually a couple times. First person that's reached out to call me and say, "Hey, what do you want to talk about?" Or, it's pretty cool. So originally, when we started this, we were going to talk about the Conehead stuff, the hydrocephalic beans, and I think we should start there because it's a good place to start. And then today, when you reached out before the show, you wanted to talk about Western civilization and what's at stake. And I think it's a good topic of conversation to have, because I do think that the West is important, and maybe more important in ways that we don't completely understand. And we can go down that rabbit hole and, pick that apart and see, what your thoughts are on that and why, and, how it relates to an organizing principle. But why don't we start with the Coneheads and the hydrocephalic beans? When did you first of all, let me find out a little bit more about you. What's your background? Like, what did you do when you were up and about and tasting food at a regular basis? And what was your life path, your work, your career? Let's fill in those blanks.
Okay. Well, I went to Stanford University, got a degree in chemistry. I went to Yale Medical School, neurology residence at the UCSF San Francisco, and I practiced neurology up in Petaluma for about 40 plus years.
So you're Dr. Edward Spencer.
Yes.
All right. Good to know that. So you were a medical practitioner at a pretty high level. I mean, neurology it's not ear, nose, and throat.
Yeah, I don't think they teach us all about neurology, and DARPA knows, but it's not in the programs,
Right.
Well, medicine's a shambles, we know that.
Right.
COVID, we know that. But I became obsessed. Well, this is strange, but I don't go into it. I became obsessed with the Shakespeare mystery of who is actually Shakespeare, and that led one thing to another. And I read L. Fletcher Prouty said that Buckminster Fuller traveled all over the world, and wherever he went, the man allegedly in charge always answered to something or someone higher. And I thought, well, I'm going to work on that because I'm obsessive, whatever, And I did, and that led me into a number of dimensions. I got into, if I put that correctly, a number of books. An important book is Charles Hapgood, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, because the entire Earth was mapped during the Ice Age, many thousands of years ago, the whole thing. And then I read the book Big Brain, which took us into the Coneheads. It didn't really directly go into the Coneheads. It talked about Homo capensis, and the fact that Homo capensis, studied by Lynch and Granger, who wrote the book Big Brain, they did a very conservative estimate of its IQ, and this was basically the brain is 30% larger. And so the association area, what would be the effect on the association area of this large? They came up with an IQ for Homo capensis of average of 149,
Wow.
and 10 to 15% of the population at 180 or more. And that's a lot of points. That's a lot of power. And that's not the Coneheads. The Homo capensis has a normal brain, but it's just a big head.
What period are we talking about, and where on the planet did they populate?
Well, the skulls have been found. The major source is the
Now, we're talking Homo capensis here, not Coneheads, right? Homo capensis.
Homo capensis. I can't actually answer that.
Okay.
Okay. There are big heads walking around. I have a friend, Izumi, Japanese, who in Cairo, we talked about this, and she said, well, she would see somebody with a big head every now and then. I mean, it wasn't never, they were there,
right,
with just big heads. And I've had other reports like that, but with the Coneheads, there are skulls all over the place.
mm-hmm.
And okay, and an important thing, I think, for this argument is Lynch and Granger, the coda in their book, Big Brain. And that says that at exploration of a communal living site, not far from where they discovered Homo capensis, who started out as Boscop Man, they found a site where the human skeletons, the humans, had been casually interred. So I guess that meant we were just thrown into the dirt, But
right.
there was, they found off to the side an elaborate tomb with one individual placed facing the sun. And a normal appearing human skeleton, but a great big head. So I would interpret that, and it's not a big push to say that he was in charge and we weren't,
Right.
And I can't give the dates on that because I haven't found this, and when this event took place or when this communal living.
Do you think this is kind of at the beginning of what we would call the agrarian period, and that humans who were hunter-gatherers are kind of scooped up? They're put on a very different kind of diet, eating lots of wheat or vegetables. They begin to get smaller and they become domesticated. Is there some connection to that period at all?
I really don't know. Let's say this is all in South Africa.
Oh, interesting. Oh, very interesting. South Africa. Okay.
If we go to the Transvaal and then a little bit below that.
Right. I know.
There's
Yes.
an area, a remarkable area of stone ruin.
Yeah. I interviewed Michael Tellinger a long time ago.
Oh, good. Yeah.
About that spot. He was one of the first interviews I did, I think, on my channel. That was maybe 2010, I think, late 2010, early 2011. Yeah. Very interesting stuff. Yeah.
And, I don't agree with Michael Tellinger on everything, but he published, along with Michael Hine, a couple of really great coffee table books with pictures of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So there are evidence of agriculture there. There are a lot of gold mines.
Right.
And there are these stone ruins with frequent, what would appear to be silos. Of course, they don't have the tops now, and without windows or doors. And so I have hypothesized that these were chambers for two-legged critters, us, so to speak,
Right.
If these, the walls were plastered over, you couldn't get out at night without a ladder. And I kind of think that maybe that area is the crucible of humanity.
So this is a really interesting point that you bring up, because a long time ago, I read this book. I think it was called Shining the Light. I think that's the name of this book. And the author, ironically, is named Robert Shapiro, but it's not OJ's lawyer. But he supposedly channeled this whole Shining the Light series of books. And I only read the first one, but there was some very compelling information in that book. And the compelling information was that South Africa was an outpost of Atlantis, right? Whatever this thing that we know as Atlantis, which had suffered some kind of cataclysmic, antediluvian catastrophe, did not affect this South African outpost. So the people who were there, they found out about what happened. Now, according to this whole story, and you really have to kind of go down a really big rabbit hole to kind of buy into this, but it sounds pretty reasonable to me. The creator god of Atlantis was Lucifer, right? And in this particular story, there are extraterrestrial connections between Yahweh and Lucifer, and that Yahweh was a pure-blooded Syrian, and then Lucifer was part Orion and part Syrian, and they were half brothers. And we've seen that tale in a number of creation stories. Like, for instance, Loki and Thor are half brothers, right? And who is Loki? Loki is the trickster god. And he's the one that, theoretically loves humanity, whereas Thor is the god of, reason and rationality and order, right? So Lucifer, they're terraforming the earth. And Lucifer sees these lowly little Lemurians and says, you guys are being treated like dirt. Let's start something new. And so theoretically, there's the whole Atlantean thing and DNA manipulation. That gets into the whole Epic of Gilgamesh world. And this goes on for a while, right? Now, remember that Lucifer is the creator god of this world. And so when this world goes under, the people that are there in this outpost in South Africa have to do something. So they telepathically reach out to the spirit of Lucifer. Now, Lucifer he's passed. But what happens is that the Orions pick up on these transmissions, and then they show up in South Africa and they say, hey, look, we're with Lucifer. We're part of his, his clan, his tribe, his people, his family. We're here to help you. And they, oh, great, thank God. But then what happens is that, again, this is all according to this book, that the Orions create two foods that the humans begin to eat and consume. Well, one's a food and one's a substance. And then what happens is that the humans become genetically altered and manipulated, and they become more docile. And those two substances, one is cocoa, the cocoa bean, and the other is tobacco. And so they cultivate this in South Africa, and they become genetically modified. Now, this group of people in South Africa who have contact with the Orions, they are made the custodians of the planet, right? They become the group that will essentially run Earth as a proxy for the group behind the group. So I just wanted to throw that out there to you because it does dovetail with this whole South African origin story.
Well, it's a pretty complex story, and I would first ask what sort of evidence is accumulated.
There's none. This is just a channeled thing, right? It's just a completely channeled thing. But the thing that's interesting about it is that it does connect with South Africa. He didn't say Antarctica. He didn't say Peru. It was South Africa specifically. And that this kind of outcrop of the Atlantean civilization seems to be where the custodial race gets its marching orders.
Well, that, the business of Orion connection is very interesting because in Adam's calendar, there is a situation with stones. They're recumbent now that would cite Orion as it came over the horizon 1,600 years ago. Did I get that right? Or was it maybe 16,000?
Probably 16,000.
16,000 years ago. So that's sort of a time marker. That's one time marker that I have. And of course, Orion, I guess the pyramids are laid out in the formation of Orion. And down in Adam's calendar, there's a small pyramid. I think it's to the west, and it's on the exact longitude of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So there's a connection to Orion there. Beyond that, I don't know. And I'm fascinated by the time marker of 160,000 years. I think that's helpful. That's possibly a useful thing to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Where should we go?
So I wanted to bring up the Coneheads, because of a picture of the Coneheads.
Yeah.
I mean, so when I say Coneheads, I'm talking about Saturday Night Live, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that's interesting. Like, why did Saturday Night Live and Dan Aykroyd, who, by the way, is a ufologist, right?
Yeah.
Why did they come up with this skit, which became very popular and got turned into a movie about these Coneheads?
I've wondered the same thing. Where did that come from?
Right.
After I discovered the real Coneheads, I really have. I think you're right. Where did he get these ideas?
And look at the teeth. They've got multiple sets of teeth. You see that?
Oh yeah. What is that picture? Ooh,
that's from the movie. That's a still. That's a looks like it's a YouTube. It's a Daily Motion clip.
Well,
if I play it, I'll have this thing taken down because it'll violate some kind of a copyright thing. I wish I could make that bigger, but he's got 3 sets of teeth.
Yeah, well, I wish I had at least 2. I'll have to look at that movie. I've never seen that movie.
I think it's probably must see viewing for you, right? Because it's in this whole weird, hidden in plain sight kind of world that we're living in.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I did a quick little fact check around the Coneheads, and the name of Dan Aykroyd's character is Beldar.
Yeah.
So I looked up Beldar, and Beldar is actually a word in the Urdu language, which originates in northern India. And it's roughly translated into the word pioneer. Pioneer, right. Beldar means roughly
pioneer here.
Exactly.
And he made allusions to that, better watch out. But it was very, subtle.
Right. The other thing that's interesting about the Urdu is that they come from northern India, and they seem to be kind of in this very interesting intersection, because northern India is not like southern India at all, connecting to places like Nepal, and I think Afghanistan is kind of close to there as well. But there's also this interesting connection between the East and the West in northern India, which gets into the whole Western thing that we're going to talk about. And so it seems like northern India is this very interesting place. And I believe the whole Aryan culture is also connected to northern India as well, right? And so we often think of that as being connected to this idea of the West. So Beldar, who is a Conehead, is part of this. It's part of the language of this group, and that roughly translates into the word pioneer. So they're pioneering new territory.
Wow. Well, there's something about India, and I wasn't really thinking about this, but there's supposed to be an area in India, 8,500 years old, about that they place it there, that was devastated by an atomic blast.
Right.
And you heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then also someone was saying that Napoleon, what burned up Moscow was a nuclear blast. Because the burning was all symmetrical and the Kremlin was knocked down.
Right.
And and a lot of this, okay, Napoleon was a very, effective man for humanity, really, when you come down to it. And the origins of Western civilization is Indo-European, and that suddenly would go with something in northern India,
right,
that was very effective and got blown away.
Yeah.
And, so I don't know how to put this all together, and it's something to be researched, because this is just, when you mention all of that, it suddenly came to me that works out, that the Western civilization, Ricardo Duchesne is who wrote The Uniqueness of Western Civilization, that it's Indo-European, that it started there, and it could be from that.
Yeah, it was just an interesting little tidbit, because it did intersect with what we were going to talk about, right? And it's oddly enough through Dan Aykroyd's character, who plays a Conehead, has the name of Beldar. Beldar connected to the northern European Urdu tribe, and right there, in that kind of interesting intersection between the East and the West, and connecting in with this whole kind of Aryan group that comes down into northern India, and maybe the gateway of the West. It was an interesting connection. I thought we'd be able to at least poke around on that one a little bit.
I wonder. I don't know. Dan Aykroyd is still alive. I wonder.
Yeah, he's alive. He's a big UFO head. I mean, he knows all about this stuff, and I don't. I don't know the genesis of the Conehead skit, but I'll bet you it was Dan Aykroyd. Like, he was the guy that was behind that skit, and Dan Aykroyd's really smart too. That's the other thing about Dan Aykroyd. He's a very bright dude. So I think we're doing a little show and tell here. It's like, ha ha ha, we'll laugh at it a little bit. Oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that funny? But what they're really telling us is, hey, there's something here. We'll take the piss out of it, but and once we take the piss out of it, we did our job. We told you, now we can move on. Right. It's usually how it works. Yeah. So let's get into the other Coneheads, the ones that are generally talked about. I think I have a nice, let's see.
Ian Foster's.
The imposters.
Not so much.
Are you a sports fan at all?
Well, a little bit. I love Joe Montana, of course.
Are you a Giants fan at all?
When they were.
They were the best. That was the best. That was the best period. Are you a Giants fan at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Bruce Bochy, very large head. That was one of the things that everybody talked about. Like, his head was way bigger than other people, right? What was interesting about Bruce Bochy is that he was Basque. Basque.
I didn't know his head was so large. It never was apparent to me. Of course, I've never seen him up close and personal. Very interesting.
Now, here's a guy. We're going to get into the archaeological stuff, but here's a guy. He's got an enormous freaking head. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. I just saw this. Took me to here. Let me show you this. This is a contemporary human. Look at this guy.
Yeah. Who is that?
I don't know. I clicked on there, and it wanted to make me sign up for something. Right. Here's another guy. huge. This guy reminds me of the Outer Limits. Here's another big-headed dude. Reminds me of the Outer Limits episode with David McCallum called The Sixth Finger. Do you know that episode?
I don't know. I don't remember that.
So there's this one Outer Limits episode where it takes place in Wales, and there's a miner in Wales who's very gruff and unpolished, and he becomes the assistant of this scientist. And the scientist has created this machine that allows him to advance David McCallum's character development thousands of years into the future. And he grows this giant head, and he becomes super smart and has telepathy, but he also becomes a bit of a psychopath as well. Right. So it's a very interesting episode. And there's this one transition phase where he actually looks like this guy, Yuval Harari from he's one of Klaus Schwab's people. He's really into transhumanism. He also has a big freaking head. Let me go into the old heads. Not the new heads, which are kind of interesting, but here we go. There's been so much effort to discredit these giant heads, right? So much effort. Why do you? Well, I mean, I have my own theory, but I want to ask you, why is there such an effort to downplay these giant skulls?
Well,
and not just giant, but elongated.
Yeah, but Robert Tello discovered all this in South America in 1925, and it's suppressed. And I've tried to bring this to the attention of some paleontologists, I guess, somebody who was, big on Bigfoot, and they just blew me off. I think it's because they're still here, and they may be, let's say, there is a pyramid. We go up to the pyramid, and there's a facade everywhere, and then you penetrate the facade. They're towards the top of the pyramid, and maybe one species is really at the top of controlling things. And that's why they're hidden.
It also reminds me of the character in Alien, like that the monster in Alien has the hydrocephalic skull.
Yeah.
So what did Giger know about that? Now, when you and I talked, you believe that they are specifically at war with humanity.
Well, I think that this started out, I think that they actually, or something above humanity, controlled the Ice Age civilization. And the Ice Age civilization was knocked flat by comets 12,800 years ago. You can read about this with Graham Hancock, who's like that at some great intensity. And so, since we were essentially freed, we humans were freed by the comet, that because the Ice Age civilization was discombobulated, and we began to build our own civilization. And there's been a continual effort to knock them down, especially probably to knock down Egypt, which was really very fine, very special. And there's a site upon this, which the average age of civilizations before they die is 260 years. I guess we're kind of close there.
Yeah, I think we're on the respirator right now.
Yeah, and so this then fits in with an attack on Western civilization, because it is probably the most uniquely unique, is the way Duché puts it. Everything has come from the West. Now, the other side says, well, we got everything because we just plundered everywhere and we stole the ideas.
Right.
Like, yeah, but you have to look at what the West has accomplished, the music, the philosophy, the invention of technology, or rather, let's say the industrial, the invention of the airplane. Of course, everybody's got airplanes now, but they're made by Boeing and Airbus. It all came from the West. And of course, we can't say that because the other civilizations are just as important, but they're not. And so the attack is to get rid of the West. And you say putting this all together, it's whatever ran the Ice Age, whatever was the entities or the organization that ran the Ice Age is intent on destroying Western civilizations, especially now Western civilization.
Well, it's clear that it's in the crosshairs, and it's been in the crosshairs for a while, but it's really gotten dialed in the last decade.
Yeah,
for sure. So the question then is, why? I have an idea around, but I'd like to get what your answer is. Like, why is the West in the crosshairs like this?
Well, I think the answer is in the Georgia Stonehenge.
The Guidestones?
The Guidestones of Georgia, yeah. That's what we're supposed to be. And that's not what we are in the Georgia Guidestones is not much competition for anything.
Right.
And I think that what we find out with humans is that we have a lot of talent here and there dispersed. But if we work together, we have a really marvelous potential to do things. And we have done things. So everything is to keep us apart.
Yes, I agree with that.
Separate us.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Well, I think to some extent you did. And so, my feeling around this is the reason why the West has been targeted. I would actually go back and look at something like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the character would be like Utnapishtim, who is kind of this Noah-like figure. And he's very smart and he's very clever and he's very adaptable. And because he's so smart and clever and adaptable, Enki gives him the heads up and says, look, they're going to wipe you out. Okay. Because I like you. You're very smart, very clever. You remind me of me in some ways. So they're going to wipe you out. So you better get your shit together and build an ark. And that's what Utnapishtim does. And I think it's that spirit of Utnapishtim that they want to exterminate and rub out.
Yeah, and Duché describes it probably as Faustian man. Faustian, just not satisfied. You just keep at it. You just keep going. You don't just lie down and take a nap. You just keep at it. That's the West.
And that gets back to the definition of this word Beldar, which is pioneer.
Yeah.
Right. And theoretically there is this pioneering spirit and, moving ahead and innovating and there's been a real clampdown on that, going all the way into the schools and dumbing down the schools.
Yeah.
So
that's everywhere.
Yeah.
I think that by thinking in terms of Western civilization is a way to thwart that puts us together. I would say that what happens to anyone, and a lot does, it's collateral damage. They may be attacked, but their real target is Western civilization.
Right. And they've done such a marvelous job demonizing it. And by the way, let's be clear. We have had people that have infiltrated our government and our military and our media, and particularly the military, who have done really terrible things to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And it makes it a lot easier to put a target on the back of the West.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So what do we do about this, Edward?
Well, there we go. I've got 15 minutes to come up with a solution. Well,
I'm sure you've been thinking about it.
I think, yeah, we have to work together, and everything is out there to tear us apart.
Right.
And families, entire families, are divided on this issue. So we have to think about what's good in the people who don't agree with us. We have to find out how we can agree with them and how we can establish love. And we have to cast a big net, which I think is Western civilization, that we're all part of Western civilization, and we must, at some level, get along, even though we don't. And I think a remarkable example of this is this is from Steve Kirsch, is the Dean of Science at MIT. Now you can imagine the Dean of Science is supposed to like science, right? But she will not at all deal with the COVID issue. Not at all.
Right.
So there, there you go. And
right.
And, she's a step up or step down. And it's a
that thing just became like Hadrian's Wall, right? I mean, that's what happened.
Yeah.
It became this barricade, this metaphysical barricade between people, metaphysical, ideological, and then even, biological barricade between people. I like your idea of trying to find a way to build bridges towards people. Have you had any experience and any success around that in your own life?
Marginal success. I've just said, I don't want to hammer on a significant person anymore about my conspiracy thing. But another aspect.
So what you're saying is that you had somebody in your life where you were trying to put the sunglasses on them so they could see how the world really was.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, thank you. No, thank you. So you decided, okay, I'm going to have a different kind of level of interaction with this person, try to find a common ground that we can relate on. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And, just the human interaction, the kindness, the love of humans. I mean,
I think that's fair, right? I think that's a fair thing, because sometimes people want to take a jackhammer to people, like that fight scene in They Live, where Roddy Piper has to beat the hell out of Keith David to put the glasses on. And that's not always going to work, right? I mean, it's just not going to work. And so understanding how you can relate to a person and find those human pieces where you can relate to them on, you do that until you can't, right?
There's another point I want to bring up. We're talking about sort of stuff that we see and hear, but we have to think about targeted individuals, V2K, hearing voices 24/7 that are projected from the outside. And I know, actually from personal experience, I had V2K once that I recognized, but once, and maybe other times.
What is D2K?
Voice to skull.
Well, that is the voice to skull technology.
Yeah. And targeted individuals. There are people.
Right.
So there's something. I'll use the word broadcast, but that's not the frequencies. I don't know exactly how it's done. And I think Robert Duncan knows how it's done, but he can't say. you know, his Robert Duncan has written on the Matrix. What the hell is it? The Matrix. I don't know, another and another book which now has been flushed out of my head. Another book on this, on mind catchers. So there's stuff there going on that we're not aware of. And well, I had a very strange experience. I've had a little of this that I recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And one was having, this is only a couple of years ago, when all of what I'm talking about was way past, of having sex with a woman, an Asian woman, early one morning. And it was very, very real. Her face was blurred out, and there was sort of a brownness to the right. And my grandson was working with on an iPad against my back, and it was extraordinary. And I immediately got up and wrote it up because there was nothing else to do, but there was no other way. But I felt that. And then the other thing is, it's in the middle of the night. Or this deep voice came on. I think it had an Israeli accent. Ed, wake up, Ed. You've been bad. You turn the switches and use the power to tell me that? But the next day, my grandson was sitting at the kitchen table with me, and he said, "Did you hear that? It was Nana. She said, 'Oh, Ed.'" Then he got up and started walking towards her bedroom. He said, "Is Nana here?" No, she wasn't. She was at work. So that, the way I would interpret this, that "wake up, Ed," made me quite aware of voice to skull. And
so was Nana aware of your like astral sex with the Asian woman?
I don't think so.
We won't tell her.
I haven't told her about that. I mean,
Yeah.
that was very disturbing to me. And then, of course, with the deep voice,
Right.
put me in mind so that when my grandson reacted that way, I knew what was going on. In a sense, I knew he was being hit, for want of a better word.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Were you practicing neurology at the time, or were you retired?
I was retired and way old. And let's see, way old is, how old is way old? I don't know. I was past sex.
Right. Yeah.
No,
Wow. Interesting stuff. I had Dr. Eric Karlstrom on my show. Do you know who he is?
I do and I don't. I think I know his name. And
He's written about targeted individuals, and he himself was a targeted individual. He was a professor, I believe. Where was it? UC, it was a college, I think Merced or something like that. I think it was UC Merced. But the weird thing was I went through a period in the mid 2000s, starting around 2005, all the way up through about 2009, 2010, where I was the recipient of a lot of very strange stuff that I would say resembled targeting. And I was living in Albany, which is right next to Berkeley. And of course, DARPA is right up on the hill there above Berkeley. So they were running a lot of DARPA experiments. And Dr. Karlstrom was actually in Berkeley around the same time that I was experiencing the targeting issues for me. And that's when it began for him. It was a strange kind of, we discovered this when we were doing the interview on the show, but he may be an interesting source for you to dive into. He's got a website, he's got a book. So if you have any other interest in this whole targeting and voice to skull stuff.
Would you give me his name again?
Eric Karlstrom. All up. I'll send it to you in an email since I have your email
Good.
address.
Okay, I'm going to go one more thing about the
Sure.
text that I had, and then since I disclosed it, the feelings were intense, and I had what for my would be an eruption, not much, but the woman was tight. It was very tight, that feeling. It was not like a dream I've ever had. Oh, okay. Then the next, probably a couple of days.
So when you say tight, like that was the friction that you were experiencing, right?
Yeah. And
Right.
the next, and this was not a pleasant thing. This was. Okay, and then I think the next day, it came to me, where that the woman was dead. I thought, this sounds like a Guantanamo special.
Sounds like Jimmy Savile is what it sounds like.
That they saved up to to install in people. So that's kind of it. I mean, it was really
Yeah. What did you do with that? Like, how did you handle that in the days and the weeks after that?
well, I told the people, and I felt I could tell, and that's about it. And I wrote it up so I wouldn't forget it,
Right.
because I thought, and there were, because of the special characteristics, there was no voice, no sound, and there was a brownness to the right visual field, whatever that
Interesting.
means. I'm just, that something was being done, and I tried to record what I could, so that maybe it could be figured out.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting experience.
Yeah,
It's almost like a succubi, right?
I guess, I just whether the succubi is sex at night.
Yeah, they're these spirit creatures. They're succubi. Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah. But yeah, but it wasn't,
Interesting.
it wasn't a warm, fuzzy feeling or anything.
No, it sounds pretty.
Or nothing, or all of
Have you ever had any UFO experiences by any chance?
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have not personally had a UFO experience, but I'm very much fond of, or a devotee of Captain Terahuchi and JAL Flight 1628, which was encountered by, I think this was in '86, was over in Alaska, encountered a couple of really strange craft right in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Strange, I almost can't describe them, the size of a DC-8. And then found that he was being followed by something that was larger than an aircraft carrier.
Wow.
And, and he made a turn. He went through a circle to the right, and it was still there. And he, I think he talked to People magazine. I don't have that reference. I think there is evidence that the UFOs are made on Earth, and maybe in Boeing, because the first UFOs were sighted over Mount Rainier. I think there were 7 or 9 of them.
Yep.
That's a lot, and there were little things,
Mm-hmm.
and then they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and now there seems to be some evidence that they're in the kilometer-mile range.
Right.
And what I think these things are, I think they are built on Earth. They are under the direction of the overlords, whoever we're going to find them at this time, and that they are out. They are there for a purpose. Or something like 400 trillion has been expropriated, stolen.
Yeah, that makes sense. The whole black budget stuff, and
and they have gone out to inventory and perhaps nudge the comet swarm that's going to hit us circa 2030. And you can read about this in Graham Hancock's book, The Mars Mystery, 1998. And the interesting thing about this book, and well, it's a great book all along. And I met Graham in 2016. I went to Contact in the Desert. He did not talk about any of this. He did not talk about it. He talked about going to the top of the pyramid and all of that. And I gave him a little piece of paper with all of my thesis on it. Physics wrote it, put it in his pocket. I've never heard from him. The next thing I hear about Graham Hancock is he's had a terrible seizure. He's been put in an induced coma. And, they thought he was going to die. And he didn't, happily, he didn't die. But I don't know if my comments on big brains, Coneheads, triggered him to do other things. And then he was hit. It's hard for me to believe that I have that much effect on anything or influence, but those are the facts, And I think that all of the stuff on Mars, the face on Mars, the D&M pyramid, all of these things were built by humans. Between I think especially between 1947, we'll say roughly when all of this got going, and Viking, 1976.
Yeah, the whole Mars thing is really interesting. There are some people who believe this gets back to Utnapishtim, and I'm not sure if I'll go there because I think that maybe it's a possibility, but there are some people that believe that Noah and the Ark actually went to Mars. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, there's a massive canyon on Mars that's named after Noah. So it's another kind of weird tributary that, we could go down.
It was killed 17 to 20,000 years ago.
What's that?
By comet, blew away the atmosphere, the ocean.
Right. That gets into the whole extraterrestrial, the interstellar or the intersolar system war theoretically between Marduk and Mars, right? Maldak and Mars. So that's a whole other topic of discussion we can get into. Well, we should have you back on again someday.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like to come back on again?
Yeah, and I hope I'm not thinner because I've learned how to eat.
I'll send you a link to that fruit. Maybe that fruit will have a reverse effect on you.
Yeah, I should do that. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the program on Tartaria.
Michelle, who should be here pretty soon, is considered to be one of the best Tartarian researchers.
Okay.
I think she is. I think she's been way ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. So, fingers crossed, we'll get her in here in a few minutes and we'll start talking about it. So I could put you, and you can stay here until she shows up or whatever. But when she shows up, I could mic you off and I can take your video off. You can still be in the chat if you want to stick around.
Yeah.
You want to do that?
Oh yeah. I'd like to. Yeah, I'd like to kind of stick around.
It looks like Michelle is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute you and I'm going to take your, stop your video and you can just hang out and see what's going on here. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe I'll bring you back on at the end and see if you have any thoughts about this. Okay.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right. That was Eddie Spencer. That was a very interesting little story there about the astral sex. Call it that way. Call it that. Let's bring Michelle in. There she is.
Hi,
Hey, Michelle. Thank you for being here. Nice to meet you.
I was very pleased to receive the invitation, so thank you very much.
Awesome. Looks like you are a cat person. You've got a Tartarian cat castle in the background there.
Yes, yeah, I got him at my feet right now.
Okay, yeah, I've got Rosie right here. Well, nice to meet you. And boy, I tell you, a lot of people have been clamoring. You got to have Michelle Gibson on. You got to have Michelle Gibson on. I'm like, okay, we're going to make it happen. And today is the day. So thanks again for being here, and thanks for doing all your work. And we're gonna jump into the Tartarian stuff and circuitboard Earth, which is really one of your big things. Before we do that, I want to find out a little bit more about you and your background, like how you got into this. What were you like in high school? What did you do in high school?
I was pretty bookwormish,
Yeah.
very serious student, and I've identified as an old soul my whole life. Even before any of this stuff started to come through to me. But I was a big reader. I read books like the Iliad and the Odyssey when they weren't required,
Right.
And Les Miserables and The Count of Monte Cristo I was reading when I was in high school.
Right.
So I think I always had a mind that I didn't want to feed myself junk.
Right.
And that pretty much remains true to this day.
So that dovetails with having a high emotional IQ, by the way, as well. Right. Which you were probably one of those kids in the Daniel Goleman experiment. You would have waited and gotten that second donut, I bet.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I never did anything remotely like this before 2018. And I started to receive the information that my research is based on around 2016. But I felt connected to this my whole life. Even when I was a little kid, I would notice things and kind of file it away that I started to pull back out when I started to piece together what I became aware of. And when I became aware of it, I'm basically a well-prepared vessel.
Yes.
All the things.
With your research, you have the map in you already, right?
Yeah, it just had to come out because I didn't know anything about any of this when I was growing up. I grew up in a middle-class family. My parents were teachers. My parents weren't strict about going to church, but I was dedicated in the Baptist church when I was a baby and, baptized when I was a teenager and all of that stuff. But it really didn't resonate with me. But that's the kind of environment I had in my childhood. So this has just come to me through synchronicities in my life, through intuition, doing things that people didn't expect, moving around to a lot of different places. I was in the Army for 4 years. I spent time in Germany, 2 years. And then when I got out of the service, I went to college and got my degree in social work and psychology. And I spent about 13 years as a geriatric social worker and activities director. And then my husband, I found out a couple of years ago, it was related to Agent Orange, but my husband got catastrophically ill and he passed away in 2001. And then I got out of that field around 2003, I think, because I couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
And I haven't worked in that field since then. I've had other different job experiences. I was the committee and projects coordinator for the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce for about 5 years.
Fairbanks, Alaska.
Mm-hmm. And that was an amazing experience.
We were just talking about Alaska with Eddie Spencer. So you're in Arizona now, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I moved here in 2017, February of 2017. And I had already started to receive, I had already, I guess, been incubating what I found, which was basically, I learned about sacred geometry around 2007 when I was living in Fairbanks. My husband and I had lived there from 94 to 99, and then I moved back there in 2006 and lived there from 2006 to 2012. It was between 2006 and 2012 that it was like a whole new streams of information were opening up, and that was when I learned about sacred geometry. I went to Oklahoma in 2012 to help my mom. My brother had moved my mom there, and I was involved in making sure, helping out with that for quite a while.
Mhm.
And it was when I was in Oklahoma between 2012, 2016, that I started to get the information about this ancient civilization that's actually all around us, that we're living on top of, working in every day. No knowledge of it because we haven't been told about it. And that's how they've been able to hide it.
Mhm.
And, you know, it feels like I said, I started doing my blogging and video making in earnest in 2018. But in 2016, and I apologize for my tattered map.
That's okay.
I was having experiences traveling around the area, and a friend of mine gave me a map, one of my travel friends, and I had it.
Oh, that's like a Herkaba, isn't it? It's like a Herkaba.
It's a star. What's called a star tetrahedron, but it's also known as the Merkaba.
Merkaba, right? Merkaba, yeah.
And I
so
noticed
those were your journeys. Wow, look at that! Check that out.
Yeah, that was what got me started, because I noticed the cities were lining up in lines, and I had already learned about sacred geometry, and I've been eating up all the information I could find about ley lines and earth mysteries, and a lot of dowsing ley lines and finding these places in alignment. And so I had that background. I read Fingerprints of the Gods many years ago, and the Orion theory about the Giza pyramids lining up with Orion's belt.
Robert Bauval.
Yes, exactly. So I had read that when I was still up in Fairbanks. So I was getting this education in alternative history, because I was way more interested in that than what we're taught.
What was happening going on right now?
Even though I loved history when I was in high school, as a high school student.
Right.
Loved history. So I had a basic, pretty good grounding in what we're taught. Because I liked history. Yeah. But I'm really glad that I didn't study it as a degree, because I don't think I would have been open to receiving this information.
Yeah, you'd have to deconstruct all of that, and that's not an easy thing for a lot of people to do. Right?
Exactly. I mean, I didn't have anything to let go of when I started to see what was actually in the environment around me. I didn't have any belief systems that were dogmatic. That kept me from getting this. I just really wanted to know the truth. And it's not what we've been told. It doesn't even remotely resemble what we've been told.
Clearly it's not. So just a couple things. When I was young, I'm from the Bay Area in California. So I used to spend a lot of time hanging out at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, which a number of people have done videos on, including John Levi, who is one of my favorite people who dive into this material. And I was just drawn to the Palace of Fine Arts. Like, I would just go there to hang out. There were events there every now and then. I'd go to the odd concert. They have a thing called the Exploratorium there. And I used to do like summer programs with kids, and I would take the kids there sometimes. And sometimes I just go on my own just because it was fun. Right. And that's in the Palace of Fine Arts. But I would just go there for the feeling. And when you get into that building, you get into the mystery of San Francisco. Like, it is the gateway to the mystery of San Francisco and what was going on. So I always had this affinity for this thing. And it was kind of bubbling up inside of me for, all my life. I didn't know it, but it was there. And the other thing, and this gets into really your wheelhouse, which is circuit board Earth. I remember the first time I flew in a plane and I was conscious and aware. I was around 22. I'd flown in planes before, but I wasn't all that conscious, and not many times. And I was flying across the country. I was going from San Francisco to Boston. And I looked down and I said, this is a freaking circuit board. Like, these things are transistors and those are diodes. And it was just weird, right? I'm like, hasn't anybody ever like made this connection before? It's around 1983. And I just put it in the back of my head, but that was clearly something that stood out for me during that flight. And that's something that you've done a lot of work on, which I do want to touch on. The question I want to ask you, okay, and this is an important question. It seems like something happens around 2016 All of a sudden, this material begins to emerge around 2016. Why? It was always there. We were looking at mounds, the mound builders. We spent some time at pyramids, right? But nothing to this extent. What happened? What do you think happened around 20? Do you have any thoughts around this?
Well, like I said, that was when I found the star tetrahedron. Actually,
right.
Yeah, that was when I found the star tetrahedron.
Right.
And
but it seems like everybody sort of kind of moves in on Tartaria around 2016.
I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I started to wake up around the end of the Mayan calendar. That was when I really started paying attention because I was very curious. I was wondering what was going to happen. And I really thought something was going to happen on December 21st of 2012.
You're not the only one, by the way.
And so there were a lot of things I picked up around that time. And that was when I woke up spiritually. We're much more than, not only have we been taught a false history, we've been taught falsehoods about who we really are and how powerful we really are.
Agreed, 100%.
And they don't want us to know that. That's why they gaslight us. That's why, we're given completely wrong information or confusing information, or, different sides are pitted against each other, in so many ways. They don't want us to figure this stuff out. But I think something did happen on December 21st, 2012. It wasn't what I was expecting.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Something did happen.
But I think something shifted. And in my journey, I was awake enough to know between 2012 and 2016 the stuff that was going on that we're not aware of in our world. I woke up to that after I woke up spiritually. And at that level of awareness, I was really concerned there for a while. But I have a different viewpoint. Again, a lot of it was trying to figure out what was going to happen and how it was going to happen. There's a little bit of prepping going on the side and all this other stuff. But I really do feel like things are changing and the control of the narrative has been lost. And I think in this 10-year period, I think, if, talk about, the idea of a critical mass in consciousness of people waking up more and more in the collective, and the efforts to keep us from waking up have been extreme, but it hasn't been able to stop.
Right.
And my understanding is that the internet was created as a control mechanism, but what it actually turned into was an awakening mechanism, because I know I would never have gotten anywhere in the research that I'm doing without it. And my own life experiences in the last 10 years have been, nothing short of remarkable. Like I said, I've never done anything like this in my life before 2018. But it's like I have so much information to draw from that I could do it forever.
Right.
And not finish. And I don't have anything else to write about. I've always been a good writer, but I never wrote anything. And if I didn't have this to write about, I wouldn't write anything, because I'm not going to write about my life. I was never interested in journalism. I was, never, there were so many things I was never interested in, but it's like I had the skill sets that I needed to be able to do this in particular. And when it all came together for me, I was like, okay, I've got to do something with this. I can't just sit on it. I couldn't live with myself if I had gotten this kind of information and didn't do anything with it.
Right.
So
you're not only prolific because you put out a lot of content, but you're also profound. The things that you find and the connections you make between certain things are, they're very unique. And the Tartarian community has just absolutely mushroomed over the last 2 to 3 years. And there's a lot of copycat kind of things happening. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of people, there are not a lot, but there are some people who do really great work. Like,
absolutely.
And what I find interesting about this phenomenon in this community is that, there's the kind of the copycatting and there's sort of the piggybacking, but there's so much material to go around that it's almost like this sort of unconscious crowdsourcing in a sort of way, right?
Mhm.
Like I was just watching the latest Mind Unveiled video, and they were talking about the insane asylums and this technology that they were using theoretically to actually target people. Very interesting stuff. Now, I don't know if John Levi had watched that video, but John's done stuff on the insane asylums, and he did a video on Sunday about the insane asylums, and then Mind Unveiled comes out with their video on the insane asylum. So it's almost like there's this very interesting kind of collective response to what's going on right now, which I find really exciting.
And it's extremely important, because, we're all doing different things in our own way, but the information is there. And once you start to uncover it, the number of insane asylums, the number of orphanages, it's insane.
Yeah.
And no pun intended.
Yeah.
The 19th century was a mess for humanity. And I absolutely believe there was some kind of event. Some people think it was natural. I tend to think it was man-made because of how the controllers were able to come in shovel ready to start digging out enough infrastructure to be able to restart civilization, and seize control at the ground level, literally, of our, the banking, financial systems, of educational systems, all around them. It really got off the ground in the mid 19th century.
Yep.
But between 1800 and 1900, very busy time in our historical narrative.
I mean, you have, of course, the World's Fairs, which are a global event.
Mhm.
You have the burning of the cities, which is huge. Really, I was watching this documentary on Walt Whitman, who's a pretty interesting character. And when he was, I think, around 19 years old, well, I believe he started the first newspaper on Long Island, and it's still in existence to this day. But his partners, of course, schemed him out of being in the newspaper. So he got a job as a writer for a newspaper in New York City. I believe Walt Whitman is the first person to write about baseball, which is kind of interesting. But the publishing company that he worked at in Manhattan burned down. And apparently it wasn't just one publishing company. There were over 700 publishing companies on this one block that all burned down simultaneously. And so he was, again, out of a job. But that is not inconsistent for that time, where there were all these massive fires around the world.
There were 5 big fires within a 2-day period, and included the Great Chicago Fire. This is in 1871. The Peshtigo Fire in Wisconsin, which was very damaging, and there's several other fires in that region in Michigan, all in the same time frame. And it's very clear when you start looking at it, and they tell us in our history, when you go look it up, they're telling us. But then when you start digging deeper into who the people were involved and what was going on at the time, I mean, it just doesn't add up, and it's very suspicious. And you mentioned the San Francisco. It was the Panama Pacific Exposition, I believe, 1915. That would have been built, if we believe what they're telling us, after the Great San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906.
Right.
So what they tell us is that if you look at the pictures of San Francisco during and after this event, it looks apocalyptic.
Absolutely.
It looks like there was a nuclear bomb.
Absolutely.
But they tell us, they call it the ham and eggs fire. So there was the earthquake that took place, and then supposedly this fire was started by a kitchen fire. And then you read what they say, and it's almost like this Laurel and Hardy description of ineptitude from the fire department, and blowing up buildings to create fire breaks so it stops the fire. I mean, it's just ludicrous. And then they say that this 1915 exposition was to, look to the future, San Francisco moving forward. But that would have only been, 9 years?
9 years. Yeah.
After this fire that destroyed San
Destroys
Francisco.
everything. Yeah.
Right. And then it gets really interesting because you mentioned Walt Whitman. I'm just seeing a lot of evidence pointing towards the classical literature that we're taught in school. You don't have to read Jack London and Mark Twain and all this stuff. It really looks like they were part of this shaping of the new narrative. And Jack London was a reporter for a paper that was covering the San Francisco fire.
Right.
So these names pop up again and again, and then a lot of them have connections to socialism and communism. And, these are the things that we're reading in school and, watching in the movie theater. I mean, how many Calls of the Wild have been made?
Right. Absolutely. And Jack London was an avowed communist. And yeah, Whitman's politics are interesting. He's definitely not a communist. Whitman is like, if anything, he's pro-American, right? When you go back and you look at even his writings on baseball, he calls baseball the American sport, and people should go out and fill their lungs with the atmosphere of America and stuff like that. But one of the things that Whitman does do, which is kind of interesting, after he gets burned out of that job in New York, he gets an offer to go to New Orleans and write for a New Orleans newspaper. And one of the things that he does is he writes about a so-called slave auction in New Orleans. It spends a lot of time kind of chronicling that part of his time in New Orleans. And I have looked, this is just my own peregrinations, which is probably blasphemic, but I have looked at the Civil War and this whole idea of slavery, and I don't agree with the narrative.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I think something happened. I just don't think it happened as advertised.
I agree with you.
Something was going on, but I think it had a lot to do with either destruction of infrastructure and people, perhaps, and creating reasons for things having been built. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've found in my my research, particularly starports. And the same is true of the War of 1812. A lot of the starforts, coastal defense systems, were said to have been built for that. And then for the Civil War, with, again, stories that just fall apart under scrutiny. If you look up the story of the earthwork defenses of Cincinnati, is one of them, where they had all of these things built, but then nothing ever happened. That kind of thing.
Right.
So it's I think they're covers for something else going on. And I absolutely believe everything that we're seeing playing out today has everything to do with what happened before.
Yes, I agree.
It's all connected. They had to take that civilization out and, replace a smaller, lower functioning humanity from what was here before,
right,
in order to control not only us, but the grid system. And, again, and teach us what they wanted us to know and take critical thinking out of the curriculum, mm-hmm. and start to shape and mold what they wanted humanity to be.
Yeah.
And so it's all connected to what's going now. But, there is this awakening happening. It's what they've been afraid of. And God wins. So I'll leave it at that.
So that's an interesting statement, right? In a Tartarian world, who or what is God?
I honestly think that humanity, before whatever took place that wiped the civilization off the face of the earth, was functioning at a much higher level.
Absolutely.
And I do believe we have a closer connection to the creator than what we've been told. And I think and let me go kind of segue a little bit into my own research, and that will take us to circuit board Earth.
Okay.
But how I got to where I am today is when I knew enough from my sucking in all this information about, or soaking up about ley lines and everything. I knew that the ancients were precise. I knew there were the same things in Turkey that there were in South America. And, in my mind, who could have done this? That sounds great. I can see this myself. So I found this, and then I was able to extend the lines out, and I wrote down about 20 spreadsheets of places that were in alignment with each other geometrically. So either in linear or circular form. I wrote those down, and then my real research, my own original research into this started when I would go to each data point on my spreadsheet and look and see what was there. And I got an amazing tour of the world of places I'd never heard of, and places I would have no reason to look into were it not on my list. And then what I was finding is that I knew what to look for, and I always found what I was looking for.
So what were some of those places?
Oh my gosh. So just on this first page, Cape Farewell, Greenland, the Faroe Islands in Denmark, or they're part of Denmark, Trondheim, Norway, the Kjolen Mountains, the Gulf of Bothnia between Sweden and Finland, Vasa, Finland, the Yamal Peninsula in Siberia, Arkhangelsk, Russia, Tixi, Russia, Tabor, Russia, Yulin, Siberia, Nome, Alaska, McGrath, Alaska, Volcana, Alaska, Anchorage, Hoona, Juneau, Whitehorse and Yukon Territory, Dawson Creek, British Columbia, Edmonton, Alberta. And Edmonton is the tip here where this is.
Right.
So I'm following these.
So you're
from there.
really dialed into very specific places.
Right. And because I had these data points, when I went and looked, I would see the same infrastructure in all of these places, the same characteristics, the same hand of design. And then I saw the history of these places. And it was from that I was able to extrapolate the bigger picture and really go into timeline research and what we're told in the historical narrative, and then start to deconstruct the, basically the lies that have been told to explain everything in existence. Everything has a story,
right?
A reason for being there. But when you look at what we're taught, that we didn't have the technology to explain the big, beautiful buildings behind your head.
There's your guy. There's your guy right there.
Yeah, he's getting a little restless. Like, pay attention to me. It doesn't explain. I mean, we're told that the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., which is ginormous, was built between 1932 and 1935. If you go to look it up, that's what it says.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Any pictures of construction at all?
I think that there's a lot of stuff that can be photoshopped that's on the internet to.
Well,
even I haven't looked at it.
Certainly now they could manipulate photos now.
Yeah, but they do that with pictures of the World's Fairs in the 19th century to show that it was being constructed and other things. I think I do not believe that they were constructed by who we are told and when. And again, that's when you get into the stories. A lot of it's been destroyed.
Yeah.
A lot of it remains, but quite a bit of this has been destroyed.
Economically, it makes no sense when you add up the cost for all these World's Fairs and the amount of money that they theoretically spent in order to build them. And that they're operating at a loss. They're not there to make money. So it makes no economic sense. And if we're living in this capitalist world where people theoretically are doing it to make money, it doesn't add up. The equation for the amount of resources spent for the return on investment makes no sense at all.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And then you get, story after story. So I just did something I'm doing a series called Short and Sweet based on places that people have suggested, and just getting great leads and going in. And because I've been doing this research for a while, I, just pull stuff out. You know
what to look for, and it's looking for you too as well, right?
Right. I mean, it feels like that. So for example, in San Francisco at Land's End Park and the Sutro pools.
Yes, I spent some time talking about that on my show. Go ahead.
So you have the story that it was built in. So Adolf Sutro ended up in San Francisco for the first time from Prussia, probably around the 1850s.
I'm gonna bring us some visuals on this, okay?
And then he went to Virginia City and he made a fortune with the Comstock lode, which was the biggest silver mine. They went back to San Francisco, and he's credited with what are called the Sutro baths, and big, beautiful building, huge. Not much of it left today, just kind of what you see with the ruins, but that's what it used to look like. So he was given the credit for this land that he bought, Land's End, and there were a couple of other places that he owned in San Francisco. Another one being Mount Sutro. And that Sutro not only built the baths, but there's a building right next to it, the Cliff House.
Oh,
and so that would have been, was it the late 1800s, early 1900s? The date's eluding me, but that's when we're told that these, big buildings were built. And in the Cliff House, supposedly there was something on that location, and I'm thinking that burned down. And then it was another big, beautiful building was built at that location, and it burned down. And then another building was built in that location, and it didn't burn down, but it's closed as of 2020.
Right.
And so that story is repeated over and over and over again.
Look at how this thing is just placed right out here. And this is, I think, a more modern photo, probably from the 1950s. And then this is the Cliff House, and these are the baths over here. I have been on the remains of the Cliff House baths dozens and dozens of times. It is one of the most difficult places to build. You're dealing with all the inclement elements here. It's right on the edge of San Francisco. It's foggy most of the time. It's windy, right? In order to do this, you would have to be extremely sophisticated. And again, 1850s, right? Right around there, 1860s.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's the time frame that they're giving us, which from what I'm finding, that's like the reset officially ramped up in around 1850, 1851. And I believe that was in conjunction with the Crystal Palace exhibition in London. I think that was the official kickoff of the New World Order timeline.
So they also had this sky tram, which carried people out there. And it's like, that's not around anymore. I mean, look at this. Again, the engineering to do this and to get it out there, and to, it's not, it said it opened in 1955, but there's the fire. But Adolf Sutro supposedly had built a train that would go from like downtown San Francisco to come out here where people could, have their leisurely little holiday stuff. But the story doesn't match. It doesn't fit.
Right. And I think all of that was all pre-existing, including the railroads and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they, around the, that same between 1850 and 1900-ish, they were getting the systems restarted. So the train systems and the streetcar systems and the interurban systems, they started with horse-drawn or mule-drawn streetcars, for example, and they got them electrified. This was around 1850, they were drawn by horses or mules. Starting around 1870, 1890-ish, they were becoming electrified. And then by the 1930s or so, they were all gone.
Yep.
Very few remaining. I mean, you've got the streetcar system in San Francisco, and certainly you have it in other cities, but the streetcars were literally everywhere.
Yeah. I mean,
everywhere. Tiny towns.
Yeah. New York had its own version of cable cars.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've seen the footage, and a lot of people don't understand how complex the cable car system in San Francisco actually is.
I found a historical photo of a streetcar in the middle of the Amazon in Manaus, Brazil.
Wow.
Which I'm sorry, that's long gone too. But there's really no good road access. It's like a 400-mile long highway through the part of the year you can't even use, and then there's the Amazon River. But these were literally everywhere. I mean, I live in Sedona, and I was in Prescott a couple of months ago showing somebody around Prescott, because you can see all this stuff from Prescott. Well, you can see it all through here.
Right.
but I found some pavement lights, the prism lights, if you're familiar with those, that get taken out also. It's like there's a lot more going on underground than we realize.
Yep.
A natural lighting system. But there was
Let's talk about that a little bit. I'm not familiar with it. Talk about that.
Okay, now this was brought to my attention by a YouTuber named Stuff Beagle. And so he and I collaborated on a few things a couple of years ago, but it's really his baby, bringing out the importance of these lights. But it's a type of light. It's like a I want to say almost like a crystal, but they were put in the pavement, and these used to be everywhere. Like it's another thing that used to be everywhere. So the idea is that there was something underground that needed to be lit up, and those went out with electric, with the availability of electricity and electric lighting, Edison and that whole thing. Mm-hmm. So they became unfashionable. Right. But they are on the hatchet list for destruction. These lights. So there's significance to. I was walking with my friend down the street in Prescott, and it's clearly kind of a mud flood city, and pavement lights thing to by the street light. Old it looked like. It's kind of in nowhere compared to other places. I mean, so you've got Flagstaff, and then you have I-17 going next, and then Sedona's west of that a few miles, and then Prescott's kind of off in a little pocket across the mountain from where I live. Mm-hmm. So it's about an hour for me to get to that place. Mm-hmm. But it's not, I mean, you wouldn't expect to find something like streetcars there based on the history that we've been taught. So that's just one example, but all of these, these places were removed in big cities too, but definitely in small cities when, right. After Ford invented the automobile and that came online and buses came online, they didn't need the streetcars anymore. So they got rid of most of them.
Right. Right.
And why? I mean, ask you why, non-polluting, cheap, get you where you need to go. And then they bring in cars, and then you get, the whole insurance industry and, all the medical stuff that goes along with accidents, and all the legal stuff and all the pollution, and us having to pay them for gas, and, the wealthy getting richer and richer.
Right.
So they got rid of them as soon as they didn't need them anymore.
Right. And there was kind of this interesting competition between electric cars and petroleum based cars. And even there were steam engines. They had cars with steam engines. So there were these three kind of competitive models with cars early on. And then of course the combustion engine won out on all three of them.
And then so segue into this circuit board Earth idea is, let's look back at San Francisco and all the lighthouses. There's lighthouses everywhere. Yep. And I absolutely believe they were part of this grid system. I think everything worked perfectly together. Maybe just perpetually generating free energy. Mm-hmm. And it was all integrated. It was all connected, and powered this civilization. And it's hard, I have some ideas as to how it might have happened, but I think whatever happened here was relatively recently.
Yes.
And then this whole reset timeline was brought in. But I think we got pretty far along in our evolution, so to speak, from ancient to modern, because we're still using their infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I don't think this happened a long time ago. I think something happened relatively recently, and then we were given this whole new timeline.
Right.
So for an example, so we talk about the lighthouses and the connection to this energy grid system. I've seen many solar and lunar alignments, kind of like that one But there's other examples. You even see it with the Statue of Liberty, which was actually a lighthouse. There's solar and lunar alignments with these lighthouses. And they may have been there to guide ships, but I think they were doing something as well. Type in lighthouses with solar alignment. Just add with solar alignment.
Just to let you know, you're kind of breaking up a little bit on the signal side. I didn't want to interrupt you. So sometimes it clears up. I'm just letting you know.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So lighthouses with solar
alignment.
These are all images. I could go into. Let's go into all.
Yeah, go into all because I think it's just show. Put lighthouse with sun coming up behind it. It doesn't seem to want to recognize that. Because I usually find this when I'm looking at lighthouse images for different places. Because I found perfect alignments with these lighthouses. Like it's like sitting on top of it perfectly.
Like that one right there.
It's close. I've seen it. It's like it's heading in that direction. This one here, Kevin McCarthy. Or McNeil. This one here, where lighthouses, or this one. To keep going. Like that one.
That one.
This one here on the far left of that line. Fine Art America. That one, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Look at that. Right over the top.
Right over the top. And that's just. I mean, I've got lots of examples in my research. So there was definitely a connection with lighthouses and these alignments. But that's just to say that what I'm finding is that everything on Earth from this original civilization is in perfect alignment with the heavens. And
interesting.
I think they knew exactly where they were, who they were, what we were here for, which I don't think was consumerism. I think there's spiritual reasons for us being here in physical form and learning how to connect with our higher selves. So that there's that piece. So everything was in perfect alignment with heaven and earth, heaven's mirror. And Graham Hancock talks about that concept a lot. And it goes back to ancient times. So like, you have the temple complexes around the world lining up with different constellations.
Right.
And that's been known about for a long time, but it's like this same thing goes on up to our modern buildings. Everything is in alignment with the sun, with the moon, with the constellations. The grid, the street pattern of Manhattan, there's a phenomenon twice a year called Manhattanage, where the rising sun lines up with the street grid, Manhattan hinge. So everything was lined out perfectly. Buildings were in alignment with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And you can see that with buildings that are, if you start looking at the older buildings, they're all facing in the same direction.
Every single Major League Baseball stadium and even college stadiums that I've ever been in, they all faced towards the northeast. All of them. Home plate is kind of cantered a little bit towards the southwest. They're all aligned with Sirius. Every single Major League Baseball stadium is aligned with Sirius.
And I hadn't picked up on that piece of information, but yes, I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about very precisely placed infrastructure serving this purpose, I think, of probably many different purposes. But getting into the circuit board or earth concept, one of the things, the aha came, I did a piece a year or two ago on the Sulphur Springs water tower in Tampa. And I was passing by it. I'm like, what's that doing there? And this was in 2016, as I'm starting to wake up to this even more and more. So I spent about a day just kind of doing field research around the water tower. So starting there and then going into the Sulphur Springs neighborhood of Tampa, which is an older neighborhood. It's a poor neighborhood now, but still see the same trademarks there. And there's an old Greyhound racing stadium there in Sulphur Springs. And when I looked at it on Google Earth, I saw the relationship between the Tampa International Airport and the old Greyhound Stadium. And then somebody had suggested that I look at a place called the Shepherd's Bush District and that thing's huge, by the way. It's massive. And again, the story that goes along with that just doesn't match reality.
You know what this reminds me of a little bit, even though there's a different size difference, is Coit Tower in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. And myself and other researchers are looking into those kinds of things as being like something to do with airships.
Ah, interesting.
And like this one, if you read about it, it says there used to be an elevator in it, or there was an elevator in it. It's like, why would there be an elevator in a water tower?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's something more going on with these, and the story doesn't match. But when I was looking at this place in London, the London Olympics were held there at White City in this area. And I saw the White City track and I saw Heathrow Airport, and it was like the same configuration with the track and the airport. And so other people sent me other suggestions, and I'm looking at all these places and I'm seeing this pattern of airports and these tracks, some kind of ellipse, sometimes a major sports center, but all in a 45-degree angle, some kind of angular relationship. And then I got deeper into that with railroad yards and major stadiums, like you're talking about. They all tend to have the same characteristics in different places. Mm-hmm. And so, and then again, in the course of doing my research, I started to pull out more and more examples of how these patterns were so similar in different places. And that was how I developed my whole idea of the circuit board Earth, is because I was seeing these repetitive patterns. And then I was seeing things like the trolley cars in Hot Springs, the trolley cars, and you had the track, springs. What are springs actually in the grid?
Exactly. Yeah, some
kind of component.
Right.
And so, and then from there, I just picked up on relationships when I was looking at different cities and similarities between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. And if you kind of set them side by side, the stadiums down by the waterfront in both cities look the same.
Yeah.
And then you've got bridges, connecting bridges there at that same location in both places. I mean, it almost looks cookie cutter.
Right.
And yet they want us to believe all of this took place randomly. And, it's like, so just because I've been doing so much research and I'm immersed in this, I can, I'm getting to the point where I can just kind of pick these things out pretty quickly. But that was part of my journey, was looking at these places and then seeing the similarities, and pattern recognition is a skill that I do have. So it's when you look at pattern recognition between, buildings and infrastructure in different places that you can start really pulling it together, because you're not going to find it in writing.
No,
you're just not going to find it.
Yeah. So what is your 40,000 foot theory about circuit board Earth? How are they powering everything?
So, well, I think all of this, so it's very advanced, very, very, very advanced. I think it was probably, that definitely as advanced as anywhere. And I don't think we're alone.
Right.
I don't think we're it. I think we're very advanced. I think it held in balance of the universe. And jealous beings crashed the party because they wanted what humanity had. They don't have what we have, but they do have the ability to reverse, what's already there. I think we're dealing with that. But I believe there was a very ancient civilization going back to Lemuria. I believe that it was a continuum through Atlantis. It was the same civilization until relatively, I think it was all part of the same civilization. And so I bring in the idea of the Moors, and that was part of my journey to understanding this. I had a Moorish friend in Oklahoma City, know anything about the Moors before, and it was like I was coming into the whole thing came together for me between 2012 and 2016. And so it's like the controllers just kind of fragmented and fractionalized everything. So it's like we went from fractals, wholeness, to fractions. And, again, for the purpose of just taking from us and then dividing us against each other based on race and religion.
Right.
And the original civilization wasn't like that. And so Tartaria was in Asia. The Washita Empire was in North America. You had the ones that we know about in South America. You had the Mughal Empire in India, the Persian Empire, I over in Japan. Again, you see all the same infrastructure everywhere. So my conceptualization is it was all part of the same civilization, but it wasn't at war with each other. And they had the same templates. So you can see like a castle and what you might think of an English castle with a star fort base in Leeds, England, I found. And then I found something in Nagano, Japan, what would look like a Japanese castle, same artificial island configuration, but it also had a star fort base. So, it's like the same template, but, different expressions of creativity. I see it as very creative, beautiful civilization. That's how I see it.
It's inspiring, right? Like, I mean, it kind of, it checks that, that Art Nouveau sort of vibe, right? I mean, Tartaria has kind of an Art Nouveau feel to it, which is very, very elegant, sort of this high kind of, I wouldn't say it's modern, but it's got a classical feel, but it's not rooted in the kind of heavy duty classicism that we would associate with like Greece and Rome. There's something very sophisticated about the whole thing.
Right. And, again, they tell us without telling us. When you see Capriccio art and when you see steampunk, really, and again, this is my understanding, according to universal law, they can't do what they've done. Free will, and they've subverted that by lying to us to get our consent. Yes. And so, but they still have to tell us what they're doing. So they hide it. They hide it in movies. They hide it in art. They hide it in music. They hide it in literature. And we don't know any better because we haven't been taught any differently.
Right. I was talking with Mr. Cruz, who's a big fan of yours, by the way, and we were talking about airships and a bunch of other stuff. And I said to him, who'd have thought that Jules Verne was really a historian and not a science fiction writer?
And what's interesting is that, again, in following the alignments that I found, I went right through several places that were mentioned in Verne's books. And one of them is Journey to the Center of the Earth. In Iceland, there's a volcano, a stratovolcano that is the entrance that I crossed over on this alignment. And then I crossed over the islands. I think it's the Hebrides Islands, kind of off the coast of Scotland. These are like not easy places to get to or even know about. And there's one of his books came up there in that area. So it's like, how did a 19th century author even know about these places? Right.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing we talked a little bit about was the TV show, The Wild Wild West. Did you ever watch any episodes of The Wild Wild West?
No.
You should check it out because there's a big steampunk thing that runs through that series. And there are two government agents played by Robert Conrad and the guy played Artemis Gordon, whose name I'm spacing out on right now. But they do everything on a train, right? They travel on a train. So the whole train thing is very prevalent. And they have kind of weird little advanced technology that it's sort of like, okay, the whole spy thing, Ross Martin was the other actor. The whole spy thing was big at that time, and Westerns were still kind of big. So it's like, well, let's have a show that combines the spy theme with the Western, but steampunk is all over the Wild Wild West. When you get a chance, you should watch a few of those episodes.
I mean, because I absolutely believe that what we've been taught about the Wild West is all fiction.
Yeah.
But it was a very effective psyop the way they did it.
Right.
Yeah.
Very
effective. Starting out with dime novels in the 19th century and on into the movies. And I mean, they just cranked these Western movies out,
Yeah. I mean, that was a huge moneymaker, right? John Wayne starred in something like 50 of these, just, throw together Westerns before he became a big star. I mean, that tells you how popular those little Western movies were, right?
It just generations just, impacted on so many kids, on up into adulthood, fond memories and whatnot. I've done an in-depth study on that. I call it Shapers of the New Narrative, and I take it from the Westerns on up through, computer age, and what it looks like is what's going on with all of that in terms of how we've been programmed, if you will. I just wanted to add on something. Somebody left me a comment that the first cowboy was a Jesuit, and sure enough, in Arizona, Father Kino was a Jesuit, and there's a bit of information right there.
Interesting. The Wild Wild West TV series, I wouldn't call it a classic Western at all. It's different. It's got a different kind of vibe to it. Are there horses in it? Sometimes, but it's more a bit of a kind of a interesting little sci-fi thing. The steampunk is it's big in that series. So just another pitch for that. So let me ask you a question. And this is a question I've asked a number of people and some Tartaria people. Who are the inheritors? Who are the controllers?
I personally believe that non-human souls found a way to incarnate.
Interesting.
And so in terms of how I came into a lot of this, it's been very synchronistic for me. And I learned about the Great Frost of Ireland. And that was in 1740, 1741. And it was like 21 months of this really cold weather over Ireland, and like 500,000 people died. And then right after that, in 1742, was when Handel's Messiah premiered in Dublin. So it's like after this big event, this pops up like nothing ever happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then within 2 years, Mayor Rothschild was born in Frankfurt. A few years after that, Adam Weishaupt was born in Ingolstadt.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the father of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, which would be our, Illuminati.
Right.
And then in 1750, Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld was born, and he was the progenitor of what we know as the House of Windsor today. Mm-hmm. Became the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. And so I believe they replaced the original royal houses with this one lineage, this German lineage. And then you've got the Jesuits, you had infiltration into what we call Freemasonry, but Moorish Masons had built everything. So it was like using that sacred knowledge of building. They can't build like that, but they can invert. Mm-hmm. Or use use spells or whatnot to try to keep us down.
Mhm.
And you only get that at the highest levels of masonry. So like 32nd, 33rd degree know things that the lower degrees don't know. And then there's probably something operating above that.
There's degrees higher than 33. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
So,
And even
so,
I actually knew a 32nd degree Mason. He was one of my clients, and I had an interesting conversation with him. He confessed to me that he thought that there would be more, right? That he would know more, that there would be kind of, bigger revelations at the 32nd degree. So I thought that was kind of an interesting insight into that world. And I think they give away the big goods, 33rd and beyond.
right. Exactly. The 33rd know about the Moors. This is from my Moorish friend. The 32nd in Freemasonry do not, but the 32nd and 33rd degrees in European Freemasonry are Shriners.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see Freemasonry come up a lot. You see the Jesuits come up a lot. You see even the Mormons, they got it in their name.
Yeah, the Mormons are bizarre, right? They're very bizarre, and they've actually become this. And I hope I don't insult any Mormons who don't associate with Mormonism, but they have become, especially with people like Mitt Romney, I think a very divisive and challenging political power at a certain level.
And so trying to tease apart a couple of things there. One is we're talking about a small percentage within any religion that we could talk about. So within Judaism, within Christianity, within Mormonism, we're talking a very small percentage of people that are actually part of this Zionist agenda, if you will.
Right.
Very, very, very small percentage. Everybody else is,
Right.
they don't know. This is the faith I was born into, and this is what I've been taught.
By the way,
be a good person.
Of all the religions I've run across, I've had as clients, ex-Mormons are at the top. That is a group where people have just said, "I'm out of here," right? Like I am not a part of this thing anymore. Sometimes you'll find that with Catholics. Sometimes people in the church. Rarely do you find it with Judaism, by the way. You don't hear, hey man, I'm over that shit. I got brainwashed, right? But I'll hear it with Mormonism. I'm sorry. I just had to interrupt there for a minute and just bring that in.
No, but I mean, it's like I said, it's just a very small percentage of people that are part of this, what would be called a Zionist agenda,
mm-hmm.
which is, what we're seeing played out. We're told it's one thing,
right?
It's Israel and, go back to the homeland. But do many people know that the what we know as Israel today was purchased by the Rothschilds starting in the 1800s, and that was used as a focal point to further their agenda. And there's a book called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion,
mm-hmm.
From the Zionist conference in the late 19th century.
Right.
Where they kind of spell out their plans, and then when it gets out to the public, they're like, oh no, that's it's a anti-Semitic hoax.
Anti-Semitic, it's a forgery. And of course, if you quote it, you're an anti-Semite and a fascist, and you probably follow Hitler. Just goes down that road.
But it's not as, like so many other things, it's not as it's presented. I think it's the agenda that's driving what we're seeing playing out today.
I couldn't agree more with you.
non-human agenda, versus a very spiritually awakened and aware human being, connecting with the creator, which again, my understanding, and this is hard to find certain things on the internet. So if you look at, there's Zion, which is associated with a physical place in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Sion, Sion, which is associated with creation and consciousness. So it's like, and I mean, again, that's what I've been able to piece together from the research that I've done.
Right. So we're talking now, do you think it was one specific group and then began to form alliances?
I think it's an alliance.
Yeah.
I do believe fallen angels are real.
Mm-hmm.
And the original predictive programming.
Right.
Right. And they were jealous of humanity, God's newest favored creation, and they came up with a plan to really destroy God's creation, and contaminate us and defile us, and I think they're telling us what's been going on. So I think they're in the mix. I think probably negative ETs, if people are comfortable with believing that. Like I said, I don't think we're alone. And everything that I'm seeing kind of points in that direction, is that things have been interfered with greatly here. Even though there's some kind of non-interference idea out there, that's not what's taking place here. I think this is a very elaborate plan.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I kind of lean, not that I don't believe that there can be extraterrestrials. I kind of lean into the whole crypto-terrestrial idea that that these beings are like inside the earth and they emerged from the earth, right? Like, I think that's another possibility. I'm not saying that these are the people, but I feel like we always look out there, but we're not really picking up on what's beneath us in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's so much we don't know, and it's just kind of a matter of trying to piece the puzzle together with what we do have. And what I will say is that whoever they are, they're not human.
Yep. Well,
whoever's behind this are not human.
They have contrarian values to being a human.
Yeah.
So that to me is the first litmus. They may appear on some level to be altruistic and benign and set up these foundations and these trusts, but they have no human values.
Yeah. And those are all done again as fronts and covers to get what they want. And it's just the levels of deceptions goes really deep.
Let me give people a visual of your YouTube channel just so that they can see all the work that you've done, which is absolutely tremendous. Like, you are prolific. Let me just put this up here. And
I also feature other YouTube channels that
are doing
really good work.
You're generous that way. So I just saw this one with you and Chad Williams, which was excellent.
Yeah, he did a really good job. Good job. So, all the stuff about how the circuits work that he shows in that's Chad's epiphany, and he's very talented with this. But he started to go down that route when he was watching the video that I did on circuit board Earth. Right,
and this is one of the things that I love about this community, is that so many people are bringing together so many different pieces of information to create and piece together this kind of puzzle piece of this world that existed before we were here and we've been lied to about.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it just goes unbelievably deep. And in order to really be receptive to the new information, you have to be willing to let go of everything, really. Everything that we've been taught.
There's a big video for you right there, Circuit Board Earth. That was 10 months ago. It reminds me of, I used to be a big comic book reader. And there was a comic book character called The Flash. He's still around. And I remember reading this one edition, this one episode, they call them editions, of The Flash. And he was fighting an extraterrestrial, and the extraterrestrial had taken human form, and he had taken human form of somebody who played roller derby. And so they had a track, right? And you had all these people on their roller skates going around this track. and he got the Flash to chase him on roller skates because he was very fast. And he tricked the Flash into doing this because he was using the track to charge a technology, and that the Flash, with all of his superhuman speed, would supercharge his technology. So when I saw your video that you did with Chad Williams, I thought about that one comic book edition of the Flash that I read. Like, oh wow, that's interesting, because those guys in the comic book were actually writing about this thing.
Yeah. And when you take the implications of Chad's research on what's actually going on with the fields and the geometries and, the pyramid shapes and the Stargate, you think I think the technology for that, and creating that polarity between, like he says, the away team and the home team, and all the emotions and all the energy that's generated, at the same time removing our knowledge of our existence as energy beings and electrical beings. And so it's just kind of a harvesting scenario.
Oh, big time harvesting scenario. Total harvest scenario.
Yeah.
Michelle, I think we're kind of winding down a little bit here, but I'd love to have you back on at some point in time. If you're willing to join the show again, we can go even deeper. It's a good,
Yeah,
I think it's a good
so
initial interview and connection here, but I'd love to have you back on.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, so many different areas. Again, once you're awake to it and start looking, and I always like to tell people, just don't take my word for it. Just start in your own community. In some cases, in your own backyard.
Yeah.
And because it's there. When I was waking up to this in Oklahoma, my brother owned a house in Shawnee, and he had these big stones, cut and shaped stones in his yard. And I was starting to recognize what I was seeing, which is, it's ancient stone masonry.
Yeah.
But we don't pay any attention to it because it's not supposed to be there. It's, some kind of natural occurrence. It's like, no, I mean, you see, straight edges and angles and, old stone. But, that's why I say this civilization goes way back into ancient times.
Right.
But it's all part of the same civilization.
Yep.
And so start doing your own research, especially the older buildings in your community, and ask the question, is it possible that this was built when we're told? Or does this story make sense?
Right.
And I just want to add, I'm an educator on a new platform called Nguru, and our big launch is in June. But it's basically a one-stop shop for good information, hidden history, other things. That's my piece, but there's a lot of natural healing, detox, law, from a great group of people. And so we're excited about the
Nguru. I love that.
Big kickoff in June.
In June. Okay, great.
I've been the mainstay for about 6 months now, but more people are coming in, and it's like a private member club.
Mm-hmm.
And it's $9.99 a month, but you have access to everything. And it's a new concept, but it's, people need information, and information
absolutely.
from people that they can trust on how to navigate this world that we're in.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. So I wanted to bring Eddie back on here because he's been kind of hanging out a little bit. Let's take a couple minutes here. Let's just bring him on. And where'd he go?
I'm
there you are. Are you on the video? Where'd he go? Let's do that. Let's bring him back on here. I don't know if you saw the first part of the show, but it was very interesting. We talked about the large hydrocephalic head people. Any take on them?
Absolutely. There's evidence for them in the past and even in the present. I mean, I've seen pictures of people today that have heads that have an elongated shape to them.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Eddie, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So what did you think of Michelle's presentation?
Well, it's very interesting, and it's interesting that Tartaria is looming large. The one thing I do say is the task at hand is to save Western civilization.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely what we must do. And if too much of other things gets in the way of that, that's not a good thing. There's a lot to be studied, but we must save Western civilization. Okay.
I agree. And I mean, I've been following things pretty closely the last few years, and I do believe that we're seeing what was planned play out, but I think there was also a counter plan in place to stop that. And we're kind of in seeing different things happening. I believe that but on my online community, I'm seeing more and more people wake up.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing about more and more people wake up in general to something being very wrong here. And so I think the success of it depends on people being awake enough to understand what's taking place. And I mean, that's the only reason I can think of for so much still playing out is to wake people up.
Mm-hmm.
I've been awake to a lot of things for a while, and I thought I didn't think it would go this far.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to seeing you again, Michelle.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, thank you. And Robert, I have to go and try and eat something.
I'm gonna send you the link to the magic fruit, Eddie.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'll depart at this point. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye for now.
Bye, Eddie. Thank you.
All right. Michelle, it's been great. Thanks for being here, taking time out. I know you're super busy and with your research and other requests for interviews, but I'd love to have you back again sometime. And, whatever topic you want to talk about, I'm, willing to host you for it. So thanks again.
Great. And again, thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's just my comfort zone has always been writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can do that all day. And I've gotten better at the speaking part. But when I first started out a couple of years ago, this was my area that I wasn't as comfortable with. But
yeah, you're
getting
doing
better.
No, you're doing a great job. And I'll be honest, this is honest, right? When I first heard your delivery, I said to myself, and I've said this to a couple of people, I love her material. She sounds a little mechanical. Okay. That was just my own personal thing. Right. But I'm going to tell you that has changed. Like your style and your delivery has evolved and grown as you've gone through this material. So I just wanted to give you some feedback on that. I'm just being honest, right? Because you have evolved and you are doing a great job.
Anything like life for 2018. And so when I first started making videos, I had like the cheapest microphone that I could find.
Right.
And, I've been redoing some of my audio tracks and going, good Lord. So
well, you come across as I'll tell you what you come across as. You've come across as somebody who's a very serious scholar, right? Like that's how your videos come across. And I'm there for the information and I'm not really there for the entertainment value, but I think you've been great in this interview, not that you're not great in other interviews, but you've evolved as you become more comfortable with the material, your presentation, your delivery has become much more relaxed and comfortable. So, I think you're doing great. Like your growth is clearly evident on so many levels.
Well, thank you. When I first started doing interviews, I would have like pages and pages of notes,
right?
Just kind of laid in front of me so I could kind of go there. But again, it has gotten a lot easier, the more that I do it and the deeper I go into it and the deeper I have it inside me,
right?
To be able to pull out, because my research is exhaustive.
Yeah.
And there's so many details in it. I can't possibly remember everything.
Yep.
Some really cool stuff. And I'm like, I want to get all the right ideas out. And now I'm kind of like, no big deal. Yeah. So it's been fun. And I tell people, if I can do this, you can do this.
Right. Everybody has something to offer, right? Everybody's got like a a little niche thing, and everybody in the Tartarian community is very different, is there, and I love John Levi, and John has his own very kind of, style and delivery and part of his personal journey. And, Martin's very different. And, you've got new people that are coming on board all the time. And it's just, I think it's the most exciting thing that's happening on the internet. I think it's the most hopeful thing. When I dive into it, I get a feeling of this is the way it was and should be. That's where I go with it.
And people need to know that. I mean, what we're told about ourselves and our history bears no resemblance to how we were before. Right. We're given pain and suffering and misery and death as our, that's just life,
Right.
But it wasn't like that before.
To me, it's crystal clear. Let me ask you a question, and then we'll see if we can transition out of here with this. The whole idea of the Garden of Eden in the fall, right? Mm-hmm. How does that connect to and reflect back on this other civilization, which in some ways seemed to be more holistic, closer to God, and perfect? And then we have this story of the fall. Have you given any thought to that?
I have, and I'm completely comfortable with the idea that the whole earth was the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. Abundance, probably, not the suffering that we see. I think this whole civilization, all of the infrastructure they've been talking about, the girls and the organs and the bells, and, I think that was all creating a harmonious, balanced existence. I learned about Hopi prophecy long before I started doing this, and the Hopi talk about Koyan and Katsi and the world out of balance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're definitely experiencing that. Yeah. But I think Earth was a Garden of Eden, and Paradise Lost, was the whole idea of Satan and all these other disgruntled fallen angels going into the Garden of Eden. Doing what they did. Man, Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden. It's their fault. And, I think that's part of that story that we've been told, that we're sinners and, mm-hmm. Did the wrong thing, disobeyed God. So therefore we can't be in the Garden of Eden anymore. And Paradise Lost is basically that, talks about that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's giving us a very different picture of ourselves than what we were as previously. Mm-hmm. About long living years.
Well, I agree with you, and thanks for
pieces of information in there.
Yep. I agree with you. And thanks for taking a stab at that question. Michelle, I'm going to let you go. Thanks for being here. You're welcome back anytime. I had your YouTube channel up. I tried to find a website for you. Do you have a website?
I did. It's down. It's going to be coming back in a different form.
Okay.
I found out there was an unauthorized activity on there, so I just kind of had to.
There's also, interestingly enough, another
down
Michelle,
for a bit.
There's also another Michelle Gibson, who's a researcher of some sort. I don't know if you know that. It's like a college researcher. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting little twist there. So the signal's gotten pretty rough here. Michelle, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you for being here. We'll get you back on the show whenever you want to. It's been a great day having you on here on the Friday FARcast. So you take care.
Well, I will, and thank you. You too. And okay. Look forward to talking to you again.
All right. That was Michelle Gibson. Wow. Great interview. You could tell she's got I could probably talk to her for about 4 hours, and we would just be scratching the surface of this topic. That's how much work she's done. That's how much she's uncovered really since 2016. And this is when everything started to happen, was 2016. Everybody started to kind of look around and say, oh, what's going on in this building? This building. Oh, look, seems to be another building under there. What about this? And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, look at this fucking picture. Where did this come from? They actually had this. They had these things, right? None of this was really happening prior to 2016. Something happened in the timeline around 2016. Something shifted. And it was like Tartaria was emerging, or this civilization, this pan, we'll call it pan, this global pantheon of civilization began to emerge at that time. Very interesting. Kind of coincides with the emergence of Donald Trump, too. I don't think they are working hand in glove, but it's kind of something interesting to think about. Making America great again. Was that code for Tartaria? Was that code for the actual civilization that was here before the inheritors and the controllers found it, blasted it out, rewired and re-engineered people using things like insane asylums and World's Fairs for re-education, bringing in the orphans? Was that what Trump was referring to? Not the America of the 1930s or the 40s, but the America of the pre-1840s, the America of the 1700s, the America of the 1600s. Is that the America that was being touted as being made great again? If it wasn't, probably should be. I'll be back on Sunday night here on this channel, Sunday Night Astro Live. That's with me, Robert Phoenix. We got astrology and more. Tomorrow, I'm going to be dropping by Jimmy Brent's world. Jimmy Brent, a really great guy based out of Las Vegas, Beyond the Matrix. That's his show. I've done a number of episodes with him. So he records his programs and then he puts them on YouTube. And Jimmy's just a great guy. If you haven't found Behind the Matrix, I think it's Beyond the Matrix, Behind the Matrix. Let's look it up. Let's look it up. Okay. Let's see. He's got a bunch of guitar tunes. He's a guitarist. I think it's Behind the Matrix. Hold on. I don't want to fuck up Jimmy's YouTube channel here. Inside the Matrix. My bad. Inside the Matrix. Here, I'll give you a visual. He's got 6,000 subscribers. Well done, James. And you can see he's got a bunch of people on there. Kathy O'Brien. You got to.
Hey, everybody. Look
at that. So I'll be on with Jimmy on Saturday, and then I think he puts the shows up on YouTube. So there you go. All right. Thank you for being here. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to set what's possible. Thanks again to Edward Spencer. Not Edmund Spencer, the Fairy King. That was a wild story, wasn't it? I love stuff like that. And of course, Michelle Gibson. Take care. And